Welcome to Draft Sickos on the No Ceilings NBA podcast feed and YouTube channel, the show where we talk about everybody from the biggest of names to the deepest of sleepers, which is actually what we're kind of doing tonight. I'm your host, Maxwell Baumbach, joined by the real star of the show, Stephen Gillespie. Stephen, how are you doing on this lovely Father's Day?
Maxwell, happy Father's Day, first off,
Yeah,
man. How's your
you.
Father's Day been?
Good, busy. Like, we didn't really do a ton, which is fine by me. Like, I like to keep it low key. So I cooked a lot. Got to eat a lot of my favorite foods, so can't complain. That's all I need. I'm a simple man. How about you?
I am doing excellent. I woke up to 2 egg sandwiches in bed, which was fantastic. About 7 homemade Father's Day cards and a couple of store-bought ones. A couple of pictures there. It's funny, like how much kids pick up on the things that you like.
Yeah,
and I have no idea how the kids thought that I was a Kobe Bryant fan, but like several of my homemade Father's Day cards were me playing one-on-one against Kobe Bryant. And one of them was Kobe actually shooting over my head. So
yeah.
I'm like, even
which, like, in concept, it's like that would not be a fun thing for me.
No.
Yeah. Regardless of what I think about him as a player, this is not an experience I would want to have.
My kids are so realistic when it comes to their expectations of their father. So it's been good, man. But
Nice.
It's not only been good for Father's Day, and shout out to all the fathers out there,
For sure.
right? Not just Maxwell, but all the fathers out there. It's not just been a great day because of that, Maxwell, but we've even got a little bit of like NBA draft news that leaked out a little bit today.
Yeah, so the NBA draft withdrawal deadline for international prospects was today. So I'm going to do the most organized thing possible, which is to go to Jonathan Givony's Twitter account, and we'll talk about some of the guys that withdrew and stayed in. I think the biggest names to withdraw were Aizen Almansa and Malik Lewis. Like, those to me were the top 2 highest rated players on my board that withdrew today. Any strong feelings about either of those guys and what you think might be next to them? Because I pounded the table for Malik Lewis last week. I was quite a bit lower on Almansa than a lot of people. I actually believe Almansa was outside of my top 60 on my current board. So he's a guy I just had some reservations about. But anyone that really kind of shook things up for you? And if so, what's your kind of temperature on those guys?
Yeah, shout out to Dirty Dancer, the OG and NBA draft chats out there. Both were barely draftable. I had Almansa within my top 60, and then I had Malik just right outside my top 60. So kind of the inverse of you, but I wasn't necessarily shocked for Almansa because I think if you're kind of plugged into the right circles, there's kind of been rumors out there about Almansa wanting to potentially play elsewhere to kind of bolster his draft stock a little bit. I wouldn't leave the NBL off the table if I was anybody out there in the draft Twitter universe or YouTube universe out there listening. And that was explained in the tweet as well, so not really breaking a lot of ground there. But Malik was a name that a lot of people like. Maxwell, I have the utmost respect for your scouting eye. You have him in the top 60, dude. I didn't, but because of that, I didn't think it was outside the realm of the possibility that he would be in there. I'm just interested because these Ignite dudes, and we talked about this on our last show, it's like, what's the pathway for Ignite players moving forward? Like, how do they kind of bolster their draft stock? Because obviously they can't go to college, so they stay with a G League affiliate to a team. Do they go to Europe? Do they go to the NBL? Like, kind of limited in the options that they can do. So I was kind of shocked to see those names, but there were some other ones too that the real sickos out there really liked. Noah Pendo was a very popular name among the trenches of Draft Sicko Twitter.
Zachary Perrin is another one.
Yeah, Perrin. There was a few of them out there. Eli Ndiaye was another one. So there's quite a few names that withdrew. But Maxwell is just making next year's class that much more exciting to go and try to figure out, man.
Yeah, and Jelovich, who was on Mega, was another one of those guys too, where I kind of liked him every time I watched him. Like, he was never a guy that I feel like with a lot of the international guys that like aren't top 60 throughout the year, I'm always a little bit more like, I'm gonna put this off, just because it feels like a lot of times those guys end up withdrawing. What I thought was kind of interesting too is the amount of guys that ended up staying in. So Ajinka stayed in, Dadiet stayed in, Nunez stayed in. I believe Babacar Sane stayed in, Quinn Ellis stayed in, Armel Traore stayed in. So like we got a lot more of those guys than we have in past years. I think Traore is like a fun upside play because he is so big. Like I think he's like 6'8". He's got those long arms.
Yep.
He can really defend. Field can be kind of come and go. The shot's never been there for him, but it's like, yeah, if you're gonna take a project, maybe the 6'8" athletic one. Like there's worse things he could take than the guy that plays a lot of energy and rebounds to defend. So
he's European. A lot of MVPs
there.
in the NBA are European, so why not? You know
Yeah,
I mean?
yeah. From a pure MVP odds perspective, but yeah, I think Traore is just like size, rebounding, and defensive output makes him kind of an interesting one. Of like the surprising stay-in names, is there anyone that you were like, "Ooh, I'm kind of glad that this guy stayed in"?
I don't know if I was really glad that any of them stayed in. I think I was more proud of the people that withdrew their names.
Sure, yeah.
Because I really think that like Quinn Ellis could have benefited from another year. I think he's kind of on the fringes, but obviously there's enough people that like him. And
yeah,
I'm not
really
one
like
to tell
Quinn
someone
Ellis.
what to do, but like if they really like you now, if you did something to kind of help bolster your stock, how much would they like you next year type thing? You know,
I will say with Quinn Ellis, that's a name I got a lot from teams like throughout the year, more than I think people might realize. Like that's the guy I think could hear his name called that might surprise some people. Ajinka was one that was kind of interesting to me too, because that's like, I don't know, like to me, he's one of those like shooting only kind of guys. And like, I like how he moves, but I feel like every time I watch him, I'm just kind of left wanting more. Dirty Dancer, I'm kind of spot on with here. Like, I feel like he adds to the depth of the class as long as he's willing to be stashed. Like I don't mind him as a stash, like if you don't have a roster spot, but I'm semi convinced that there's just going to be like a wild bidding war in this second round. Like I really think the second round this year might be more for teams trying to get in rather than teams trying to get out or preserve a roster spot. So we'll see how it actually plays out.
The top of the undrafted free agency market is going to be pretty competitive too, because like,
I don't think there's.
I feel like that really thinned out. So if you don't get drafted and you feel like you could, you know, your phone's probably going to be ringing nonstop, and you probably won't have your like a shortage of teams that you could go and play for either.
Yeah, and I think there's been a lot of like among the more talented second round ish guys, I've been hearing a lot of like, well, if we don't get picked, we've got a two-way waiting for us, which to me is like, that's good, but it's also like from a team standpoint, a little dicey that it's like, oh man, like if we were hoping to get this guy as an undrafted, it might be tough. So let's get into our show topic for tonight.
Yeah.
So we're going to do a My Guys episode. We kind of laid out what the schedule is going to be leading up. I know our friends over at Game Theory are doing something similar tonight. There was no theft here. We like those guys. So no one, we're not stealing from them. They're not stealing from us. It's that time of year, is Stephen said, when we were talking about it earlier. But yeah, this is something that we kind of laid out a couple weeks back that we wanted to do. This is something that Nathan Grubel kind of actually set the table 4 years ago over at No Ceilings. He'd have everyone in the collective on to do their guys right before the draft. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Stephen, you came up with a really cool concept as far as like how to define our guys. So why don't you kind of walk people through the format a little bit and how we did this?
Yeah, so this is going to be broken up into a few different segments. First off, we're going to start with our number one picks. Pretty straightforward, right? But from there, Maxwell, what I borrowed a concept from Corey, who does like the draft rankings on our website. Mm-hmm. And what I did was I just went through all the reputable draft outlets out there that had recent big boards that I can pick from, not mock drafts, because those are two different things, as we always love to explain in the draft community, right? Just a couple of caveats out there. One, Bleacher Report and The Athletic didn't have an updated big boards ranking. I'm sure that's in preparation of draft week coming up very, very soon. They want to have that a little bit more relevant by the time the draft comes. Totally respect it. I didn't think Maxwell would be prudent to include rankings from 2 months ago into like the consensus average. But basically I just went through like No Ceilings, ESPN, Yahoo, Tankathon, and The Ringer, and then just compiled a list of names, roughly a top 60 consensus. And then through that, we're breaking it up into different tiers. So like the first 10 players, Maxwell and I were going to pick one guy that are quote unquote our guys that we love so much within that range. We'll do that for the top 10, the top 20, the top 30, the entire second round. And then we'll drop an honorable mention because we just love too many players that we couldn't have an honorable mention. And that honorable mention is a little bit free play. It could be like a later prospect. It could be someone that we liked in the same range as the name that we talked about earlier. It could be kind of free plays. This is just going to be a fun episode, Maxwell. We need a little bit of fun in our lives. So that's what I wanted to do.
For sure. I'm right there with you. So we're going to kick it off. We're actually going to do, first off, our number one overall player on our board. And I feel nuts saying this, but this is still subject to change for me. I've got 3 guys in my top tier of the draft. We're going to talk about one of those other guys is my guys shortly. But currently, the number one player on my board is the number one player who's been in that spot for a very long time at this point, and that is Alex Sarr from the Perth Wildcats. Just about 7 feet tall, 7'4" wingspan, extremely mobile, big man, runs the floor like a gazelle, strong rotational awareness. The defense is really the big thing with Sarr. Had one of the highest block rates in the NBL this past season. Very strong instincts as a rim protector. Moves his feet well in space. Like even when he's guarding on the perimeter and gets shaken a little bit, his recovery to still make plays around the basket is outstanding. He's going to be able to switch on smaller guys. I thought even in drop coverage as the year went along, he was doing a better job of kind of playing that cat and mouse game, using his hands, forcing players into tough shots or forcing them to make difficult decisions. I think that he's just a extremely modern big man defender, where a lot of times you talk about, hey, can this guy switch or can this guy do that? I think that the ultimate baseline you want with any big man still is, can they protect the rim? Period, point blank. Whether they can switch or not, you need that rim protection to bolster that. And Alex Sarr is able to do that at a really high level. With the switching, I think there's some like technique things that he could shore up, but I do think that he is exceptionally mobile, smooth through his hips, good feet out in space. With the NBA becoming an increasingly 5-out league, and we see all the different schemes that teams are coming up with. Like you look at how Boston was putting Drew Holiday in the dunker spot so that a small player had to protect the rim, and then bigs are guarding out on the perimeter. Like all these little tactics that teams are coming up with. It's so important, I think, to have a big switch defender. And I think Alex Sarr can be that. Offensively, I think I'm just quite a bit higher on what he is right now and what he can become than a lot of people. He is not great around the rim right now, which is my biggest concern with him. I do wish he was a little bit stronger. I wish he rolled a little bit harder. But I do think when he goes downhill, like as a roll man or when he slips a screen, he is very quick. He gets up easy off the floor. He's going to run hard in transition and get some easy ones. I'm just pretty optimistic about what he can become. I like his touch as a shooter. He was really good on pull-up 2-point shots. And I see a lot of skepticism about his shot and where he grades out relative to past bigs. He's actually right on par with like what a shooting center should look like at his age. And the volume actually grades out quite well. So when he gets compared offensively to a player like Evan Mobley, he's never going to have probably the offensive feel or pure skill level as a passer that Evan Mobley has. But I don't think he's a bad passer. I think he's quite good at putting it on the deck for a player his size. I think he's very fast with the ball in his hands for a player his size. And I think he's a lot more confident and assertive than a lot of other bigs when it comes to using their shot. And I think that bodes exceptionally well. Volume is such a good indicator for a shooter, and the amount of attempts that he's taking on a per 100 basis, it's really good. I like the passing quite a bit. He has moments that aren't great. Obviously, the physicality is going to be an issue. You need him to kind of fill out, become a true 5 to really hit all of those factors and reach those true benefits. Otherwise, he's got to really, really shoot it. But I think the combination of his ball handling, his suitability for a 5-out scheme on both ends of the floor, it's everything you could want in a modern player. I think the defense is going to be really, really high level. And I think the offense is going to be quite good. You just have to hope that the offense becomes fantastic.
I think that's all fair, man. I have Sarr within the same tier as my number one player. I have 3 people in that tier, and Sarr is one of them. And I think too that like, especially when we're looking at like the viability of Sarr being not only a top prospect, but in this class, seeing who the number one pick is, I think that he bodes well for that spot because of what Atlanta really needs, right? Like they have 2 guards, they have no shortage on the wings or the forwards, right? They do have 2 centers on their rotation, but I do feel like that Sarr gives them a little bit more of that modern presence that you spoke of, Maxwell. Now, there are concerns about is he good enough at the true center stuff to really make that worthwhile? So, I mean, you look at the offensive rebound percentage, 8.84, not great, not bad either.
Those
right?
Those are forward numbers.
Those are forward numbers, right?
Yeah.
18.2 defensive rebound percentage. Not bad, but not great either. Devin Carter has a higher rebound percentage, right?
Yeah,
In college.
and like different leagues and stuff, but that is still like relative to NBA centers. That's like of the NBA centers that stick during their pre-draft season. That's like bottom 25th percentile. Like that's not a great place to be.
Exactly. And I mean, you're looking at an 8 block percentage in the league that he's in. I think that's actually very good.
It's fantastic.
Yeah. And a 1.2 steal percentage in the league that he's in. I also think that that's very good. He had 1 double-double on the year, 9.5 assist percentage to 11% turnover percentage. I don't think that that's something that you want to bury a young, fluid, like offensively and defensively gifted big man. Like room for improvement there, but it's not going to scream like playmaker, right? And then you look at the fact that he was in the NBL, he graded in the 91st percentile in transition as a big man. That's fantastic. 95th on putbacks in a very physical league. 60th percentile on spot ups. Within those spot ups, Maxwell, he shot almost 37% on his threes. Fantastic when you're looking at how he projects as a shooting big. 91st percentile on cuts. Pretty damning numbers right here, though. 13th percentile as the roll man. Right. That's going to be a little bit of the hang up with him. He had 12 and ones on the season, 38 shooting fouls, 56 fouls drawn to only 39 committed. And Maxwell, listen to this. He held opponents to 25.9% on their threes and only 37.3% on their twos. So when you consider his measurements, when you consider the way that he projects, the ground coverage that he gives a team, that is what we're talking about with this modern big who also shot 37% on spot up 3-point looks and is in the 91st percentile in transition. I mean, ground coverage for a big man in today's NBA so big. We're looking at your Mobleys, we're looking at your Holmgrens, your Wembanyamas, your Porzingises. The list goes on. And Atlanta can do themselves some huge favors by getting a very valuable archetype in a spot that they're probably not going to be picking in for quite some time.
Yeah, and to your point, like they have the 2 bigs, but I feel like both of their 2 bigs are lacking like something critical. With Capella, it's just like there's none of the short roll, like playmaking, passing stuff that like you want to have in a modern center. And with the Kongwu, it's just positional size. Like he's just on the smaller end of the spectrum for a true big man, and he doesn't have the shooting to really overcome that. Where with Sarr, you're kind of hoping that just the myriad of things he does defensively make him a consistent force on the court and that the offensive stuff can kind of come around in time.
Especially the passing and playmaking, right? Like that's the NBA loves to run. We talk about this all the time, Maxwell. The NBA loves to run sets through their big men. The fact that you can trust Sarr to dribble is, I think, a very good thing, especially positionally. And the fact that he is low turnover and he's experimenting and really growing as a playmaker, that's kind of like uncharted territory for him to grow as a playmaker. There's a lot of runway in front of him in that regard. So I love that.
And a 9 assist rate like is a solid mark for a big man prospect. And I think the fact that he did it in a pro league and they even like trusted him to do some of that in a professional league is nice. And the NBL isn't, the ACB or anything, but even in OTE, like I thought some of those passing flashes were there. I think he's just like a nice, steady, reliable playmaker. And with the amount of zoom that NBA teams like to run, just having that ability to put it on the deck and the speed to leave guys in the dust is like a real thing. Like there was a play, I believe it was in the first Ignite game where he had like a blow by against like Ron Holland or something like that, where it's like, whoa, all right. Like that guy's really, really fast for a big man. So, and to your point, like that lends itself to the ground coverage so well too. So, we've done enough on my number 1 guy here. Let's get to yours. Who's number 1 on your board right now?
Yeah, so anybody that's really been following me kind of already knows where I'm going with this, but I got to go Steph Castle with my first pick. And now I will lead with this, that I did have Nikola Topic as my number 1.
Yep.
The ACLs lowered him. We're going to talk about him here in a little bit, so I'm not going to share a whole heck of a lot about my Topic feelings because I'm coming right back with him here in a little bit. But Stephon Castle, I think so much of the recent draft conversation has really just kind of casted an ugly shadow to the rest of his game. I mean, we're talking about a guy who measured at 6'5.5", 210 pounds, turns 20 on November 1st, 11 points per game, 5 boards, 3 assists now. I mean, when we're talking about like this guy can't pass, I mean, he averaged 3 assists in a pretty complicated scheme in a really tough conference, right? So shooting splits of 47, 27, and 76, only 2.5 fouls per game, 1.5 turnovers per game, right? So very good numbers for a freshman in any class, you know, let alone a class that is so flat at the top of this, man. And I think at the end of the day, Maxwell, it comes down to no matter how good Alex Sarr is going to be in this class, he will need someone to set him up, you know, to get the best out of him. And that's kind of like a default that I always fall back on is no matter how talented a big man is, your Anthony Davises, your Karl Anthony Towns, your Kristaps Porzingis, maybe even your Victor Wembanyama's, maybe he's so much of an alien that it doesn't matter for him. But even like your Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's, your Shaquille O'Neal's, like the best to ever do it, they need someone to set them up. That's why I will always kind of tend to value these wings, guards, forwards a little bit more. And that's why I like Steph Castle so much. I mean, he rebounds well. Offensive rebound percentage of 7.8, defensive rebound percentage of 12. 2.1 block percentage, 1.8 steal percentage. High free throw rate, 23 dunks on the year, almost 2 assists to turnover ratio. Graded out well in transition, 74th percentile pick and roll ball handler, 79th on putbacks, 47th on cuts, 67th on handoffs. He had 14 and ones on the season, Maxwell, 50 shooting fouls, 85 fouls drawn to only 81 committed, held opponents to 37% on their threes and 34.5% on their twos. So he is a lockdown defensive guy, has a good handle. I would even dare to say it's underrated and under-discussed because of the conversations that we've been having about him being a point guard. But I think there are pathways to him being a sufficient enough passer to really round out the rest of his offensive game. I mean, he functions so well in a very complicated system and purposely scaled his game back to win. So when I look at the the defensive potential with him, the 3 is the question mark, but I will always point to this, man. It's like any research that I've done on like the top players in any draft class, they grow as shooters. And the NBA typically more times than not, they improve people's 3-point percentage, right? So he's got good touch indicators around the basket. The free throw percentage is actually pretty good as well. I think that he can grow into being like, say, 33 to 35% 3-point shooter. That makes the rest of his game that much more dangerous. I trust him as like a secondary, tertiary playmaker. And I just love the defensive intensity that he brings to you every night, man. That's why I got Steph Castle as my number 1 guy.
Yeah. So as we have this discussion, I'm in the midst of doing like this enormous research piece on the value, basically how guys provide value that are non-shooters or low volume shooters in the NBA. And it's made me a little bit more skeptical as far as like how easy it is to achieve high-end outcomes for players that aren't going to hit league average as shooters. So I think for Castle, like a big part of it is like you really have to buy that the shot can come around. And he shot like 86% from the free throw line from February onward. He was like 76 for the year. He's also a guy that battled injury, which I think is like really important to talk about. But then like at the same time, people will be like, oh, well, like Zaire Williams battled injury. Like I'm going to be straight up honest. Like I'm very confused by Steph Castle. I think there's a lot that I like. I like that he is physically strong. I like that he's a really good on-ball defender. I like that he can make plays within a team concept. I think he will make more of them when he's healthier. I love the decision-making. I think he's like a really sharp, like quick decision maker too. Handle is pretty functional, not like super fast or anything. Where I just settle with him is I wonder if he is closer to like an Isaac Okoro or a Jayshawn Tate of like, this is just a guy with size who can do some dirty work for you. But there's just going to be a degree of like limitations because of a lack of gravity that's sort of always there. Because you're really going to have to hope for a pretty significant shooting leap, because even with the injury, like it's just, you generally don't see guys shoot this low of percentage from the 3-point range and then like go on to be good NBA shooters, or even like, I don't know, I guess like even like respectable But even then, it's like you kind of have to hope that the playmaking really pops, because like the amount of guys that return starter value as wings that are low volume 3-point shooters is pretty low. So like I just get scared with him, because on one hand, I see a guy who's 6'7", strong. Everybody raves about him, played in a really complicated team system, clearly smart. He's just got to get the shot right. And then on the other hand, I'm like, well, what if the shot never comes around? Like I go back on Stephon Castle more than maybe any other player in this class. He's probably going to be in my second tier on my board. I wouldn't blame, like I don't know. I was talking to a non-basketball friend about this on Saturday. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like in this class, my convictions are so much weaker than they have been in other classes, where like I spent more time on film and research than I ever have before. And there's so many guys where I'm just like, yeah, you could tell me that. And I'd be like, yeah, sure. Like to me personally, I'm a little bit lower on Castle, I think, than most people in our group, just because I think it's going to be really hard to return that starter value. But I do think that even as a role player, what he can provide is really significant. And the chance that it comes together is worth the swing somewhere in that like 4 to 11 range for me.
And I think that so many of the wings in this class have like that crimson red marker in some area.
They do.
Basketball.
They all do.
And like every single one of them do. And if I have to put a player's work ethic and determination to fix that,
yeah,
I'm probably leading Stephon Castle, man. Like,
and like he does have like, just, this sounds very rudimentary, just the assist to turnover was better than the other guys. Like if we're talking like him, Cody, Ron, right? Like it's like he's the one guy that took really good care of the ball. And you could say that that's like a construct thing too. And maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but I don't know. He picked that school for a reason. Like I don't know, man. This class,
it's really hard, right? And I'm not gonna sit here and like make it seem like, oh, like hands down, like I wrestle with. I still want to keep Nikola Topic my number one guy, but like, do I want to like, is my number one player a guy who I'm not gonna play all first year? I don't know. Like that's a tough conversation to have. So
like even me with Sarr, like I've talked all year about like the best bigs protect the rim and they score at the rim. And like my number one guy is a big who struggles to score at the rim. Like that's the class that we've got. Like that.
Yeah. And is the best player in the draft always going to be someone that needs someone to set the table for them? You know, it's a hard conversation to have, right? So that's what makes this draft fun, though, in my opinion. So Maxwell, speaking of fun, I think that we can kind of get into the conversation as to who the players are available to us that we can say these are our top 10 prospects, right? So I'm going to go ahead before I name that out. I'm going to name Nikola Topic as my top 10 dude that I'm still in on, as people could probably already tell. But and apologies to anyone out there that's looking for a visual aid. I just didn't make one, right? So maybe next year when we do this, we can do that, right? But the players that we have to pick from, according to the consensus top 10, are the aforementioned Alex Sarr and Stephon Castle, who graded out as number 1 and 2 in that exercise, Maxwell. So interesting there. Zachary Reese-Shea, Donovan Clingan, Reed Shepard, Matas Buzelis, Nikola Topic, Dalton Connect, Rob Dillingham, and Ron Holland is the number 10 prospect out of the top 10 there. So Maxwell, let's go ahead and discuss Nikola Topic. Now, I picked Nikola just because he's been my number 1 dude all throughout the entire season. I feel like you kind of have to bump him down. No matter how you feel about him, you got to have to bump him down because he's not going to be available for the majority, if not the entire first year of his career. Now, why I like him so much is that the dude is just like really good at basketball, for goodness sakes. I mean, he rebounded at a decent percentage, 38.4 assist percentage. I feel like his assist percentage, because he's not on Bartorvik, like you don't really get to see that number a lot. So I did the dirty work and looked on Real GM. 34.4 assist percentage to his 16.1 turnover percentage. That's bonkers, right? 1.9 steals percentage to only a 0.5 block. He had 2 double-doubles on the year. I'm not going to go through all these, right, because he played a majority of the season for Red Star and then some for Mega. But for Red Star, he was in the 89th percentile on pick and rolls for Red Star. and he shot 50% of his threes out of the pick and roll. Now that was only on 4 attempts, but still 50%. So that's great.
Yeah, he was taking them.
He was taking them and he was making them, right? 90th percentile on pick and rolls for Mega. So high marks no matter where he played, no matter what level of competition, operating with the ball in his hand. And then again, dude, we've gone through the numbers. I just think that we're talking about the best playmaker that is going to be taken in the first round of this year's draft. Like, that means something, right? Someone who can process the floor, someone who can just see the floor at a very high level. He only shot 31% on his threes, but Maxwell, the dude, was almost a 90% free throw shooter in a very tough league and put tremendous, immense pressure on the rim. No matter what you want to say about how he did it, you know, no matter about his frame, his size, his wingspan. I mean, the dude doesn't turn 19 until August 10th. And no matter what level of competition he was playing, dude, he put so much pressure on the rim. I get the fact that, like, teams have to weigh in the injury and stuff like that, and how often do we got to worry about this with him. But I feel like the cautionary tales end up being cautionary tales in the wrong reason retrospectively or retroactively when we talk about, like, your Michael Porter Jr.'s and players like that, to where, yeah, sure, they're hurt now, but when they come back, they could end up being the best player in this draft class. So that's why I love Topic so much, is because he is just so smart, so good, so talented, so young, and big for his position. And now I feel like a team, Maxwell, is going to get tremendous value because he will fall lower on, or he will go deeper on the board than where he originally would have, which means that he's going to return even that much more value, in my opinion.
Yeah, Topic, I think if you're just dropping into the draft, you're like, okay, well, like, he's this guard, he's got knee problems, he's supposedly not that athletic. I think he's sort of underrated as an athlete. Like, I think his first step, his catch and go movement is really good. But I think what really makes him shine is just he's such a manipulative player. Like, whether it's how he is toying with the ball screen, using a screen, rejecting, reusing, like, whatever, looking off passes, using pass fakes. Like, he just has such a deep, like, pick and roll creation bag for a player his age that's so uncommon that he's gonna get to the rim a lot, even at the next level. Like, I think the idea of, like, this guy needs a screen is so overrated. As far as just like, well, you know what a lot of NBA teams run is ball screens, and also, like, zoom actions now. Like, there's a lot of different ways that you can get a guy going downhill that doesn't have to be isolation or on an island. Do I wish he could do it? Yeah, sure. But, like, who's to say that he can't? Like, he's got enough wiggle and stuff. Maybe that's something that comes along in time. My concerns with him are just twofold. Like, he's just a really poor on-ball defender right now. He's a guy that I wish the playmaking feel offensively manifested itself more off the ball defensively. We're like the antithesis of this is like Jamal Shead. Like, Jamal Shead, like, can do some really crafty stuff out of a ball screen, and then on defense, Jamal Shead is also still the smartest guy on the court. Like, with Topic, if you just saw the defensive tape, you would not know that he's a high field player. That was always, like, kind of frustrating to me. The shot is rough right now. Like, he leaves it short a lot. I'm not sure that he has, like, the in-betweener pull-up game. I ultimately think he's going to return good value to an NBA team just solely based on his outstanding rim pressure and ridiculous passing portfolio. Like, I think even just on that alone, and the size, like we talked about last time, like, yeah, he measured short wingspan wise, but, like, he still has a 6'5.5" wingspan, which for a point guard is, like, not terrible. Like, it's not good, but it's not bad overall. Defensively, some stuff has to come around. The shot has to come around. I do think that, like, the nature of his finishes is a little concerning to me too. Like, he does take a lot of really wide angles, but he's also not contact averse, and he gets to the free throw line a lot. So there's some positives to it. But I worry a little bit about that. I worry about the fact that we're now looking at multiple injuries here, and the defense being a concern. Like, that ultimately is just combined with the shot a little too rich for me to have him super high. But I think there's a good chance that he is an awesome NBA player.
Maxwell, how would you feel if I told you that he held opponents at Red Star to only 27.3% on their threes and 38.8% at Mega, and then on their twos with Red Star, he held them to 23.5% on twos and 44.6% at Mega?
I have a hard time with individual defensive stats in general. I'm like,
Sure.
to be honest, like it's not something I've done a lot of data work on, so I don't quite know how significant that is or not. So I like, it doesn't totally move me. Like, I guess it's good. But I've also just seen him like get blown by too many times to like feel great about his defense. And like, even like the screen navigation and some of the things that he runs into on that front, just left a little bit to be desired. Like he's upright, like both on and off the ball. I don't love his ground coverage. Like his directional changes in space are pretty rough. And there was like one play that like I noted, and like I feel bad noting it because it's like I never want to like trash a pro player for no reason, but like he got blown by Scotty Wilbekin, and it's like Scotty Wilbekin is not in the NBA for a reason. Like, you know what I mean? Like, no offense to Scotty Wilbekin, but it's like one of those things like you see in here, it's like, man, like I don't like that. So yeah, I think
it doesn't match the film,
but
it doesn't match the film to me either.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I just want to bring that up though, because I was pleasantly surprised with how low those percentages were, right? And we talk all the time about how defensive metrics for the most part are more indicative of the team than it is the individual. I just find it interesting, and sometimes I feel like those percentages do match the film, which is why you're going to hear me bring them up throughout the rest of this. But Maxwell, let's go ahead and shift over to your top 10 guy. Was this the guy that you were saying might be challenging for number 1 overall?
It is Donovan Clingan, who I am strongly considering for the number 1 pick. So let's get the negative stuff out of the way. Very large man with foot problems. Historically, a pretty troubling combination. This is a guy that just straight up didn't play a lot of minutes. I also think people like Samson Johnson more than I do. Because like I know some people are like, well, they had like such a dynamic thing. They had him in like Samson Johnson. And like, I don't think so. Like Samson Johnson's a starting center in a lot of colleges, but like if it's up to me, I'm not like taking Donovan Clingan off the court to get Samson Johnson.
We got to get this guy ready for next year, right?
Yeah. Like that's, I just don't feel that strongly about him. Those two things are a real concern. The fact that he had injury problems and he didn't play a ton of minutes. He played 22.5 minutes per game.
Under 50 minutes percentage. Like,
yes. Yeah.
That's insane.
And the thing is, like, I know people are like, well, they won a lot of games by a lot of points and whatever. And it's like, yeah, but even in their competitive games, he was still playing like 32 minutes tops. 32 is the most he registered. He had 4 games with 30 minutes or more this season, and that's it. Mm-hmm. I worry about like his overall just conditioning and condition physically. That's kind of my concern with Clingan. Is just A, is he going to be healthy? B, is he ever going to be able to play enough minutes to like return this value if you're talking about him in as a number 1 pick? The pros. I think he is awesome. I think he is absolutely
there
huge.
Is that.
I don't care that he athletically tested poorly because I think his instincts are awesome. And when he was out there against really good opposition in the NCAA tournament and throughout Big East play, I never thought, oh man, this guy's just getting dusted. Like he is so large that it really doesn't matter or become too big of an issue enough of the time. At the NBA level, are there going to be one-on-one matchups that he gets put onto sometimes that are a little troubling for him, where he's going to have to give a guy too much space and someone's going to pull up on him, or maybe he's going to get too close and get blown by? Is that going to happen? Yeah, it's going to happen at times.
Sure.
I ultimately think, for the most part, he's going to do a stellar job of protecting the rim. He's an outstanding deterrent. Guys don't even go near the basket when he's on the floor. When they do, he swats them a lot of the time. Had like a 12.8 block rate over his 2 seasons off the top of my head. Did I nail that? 12.6. Dang it. Over the 2 years.
11.4 on this year. Yeah. Come on, fraud.
And I'm pretending to be an expert.
I thought you loved him.
Yeah. Really great offensive rebounder. Like this year was a good offensive rebounder, like graded out exceptionally well, but last year was even better as an offensive rebounder. Still good on the defensive glass. Awesome finisher. Awesome finisher. So like when we're talking about like other, I think where he has a chance to like a really high end outcome is if you look at a player like Rudy Gobert and some of the limitations that he has in terms of scoring the ball on the interior, like getting to post stuff, and just as a passer, like Clingan is really good at that stuff. I love his ability to operate, again, like you said with Castle, in a really complex offense, can really sling the ball out of zoom, very good at the top of the key. Some people are like, oh, well, is he going to shoot it? I don't think so. And I don't care. I don't know that he needs to shoot it to return that type of value. And if I'm the team drafting him, it's going to take several years for that to even enter the equation, most likely, based on the preliminary research I've been doing on shooters and shooting development. I'm not hung up on that. What I'm intrigued with is the idea that he could be one of the 5 best rim protectors in the league. Yeah. And also an outstanding finisher who can really operate within the confines of a modern offense. And I think like that is something that might be worth the number 1 pick in this class. I think he's incredibly safe as long as like you feel pretty good about him medically.
Yeah, I mean 7'1.75" inches without shoes. So like when this dude goes to sleep at night and wake up in the morning, he's a real 7-footer, right?
Yeah.
282 pounds, fantastic. Yeah, he turned 20 on February 23rd. Talking about a guy who shot almost 64% from the floor, 25% from deep, and only 58% from the free throw line, right?
Yeah, that's not great.
Not great, Bob. 47.8 free throw rate, 13.4 assist percentage to an 8.7 turnover percentage. That's the exact same assist to turnover ratio as Steph Castle as well. So interesting to think about there. 49.3 minutes percentage. Back to that concern that we were just talking about earlier. I don't think I'm with you, Maxwell. I don't think that the indicators are there for a jumper, nor do I really care either, right? Like I think that he's going to be incredibly valuable without a jumper, right? He's just good at what centers need to be good at. He was in the 63rd percentile on putbacks, 86th as a roll man, 92nd in transition. So we often talk about this dude as like a plotting center, but he is effective in transition as well. He had 69 shooting fouls drawn. Nice. 18 and ones, 112 fouls drawn to only 70 committed. Maxwell, this is an indication I think that matches the film. Ready for this?
Yep.
Opponents shot 33.9% on threes against him and only 35.5% on their twos against him. I think that matches the film based on what I've been able to see. So I don't blame anyone for having him as the number 1 overall pick in this year's draft. I know Corey is a big Donovan Clingan number 1 guy. Maxwell might be right on his heels and joining him there. I have him 4th on my board, but I think that he's a perfectly fine option. That if you're looking at like your Alex Sarr might not be the good enough at the center stuff to matter. Steph Castle might not be an adequate enough shooter. Reed Shepherd might run into the same problem 99% of 6'3" point guards that have 6'3" wingspans run into. Zachary Reese-Sherry might just be a terrible athlete, and maybe this shooting isn't enough to overcome the other aspects of his game as well. So you might have Donovan Clingan standing head and shoulders literally and on redrafts over the rest of everybody on the board. So I don't mind him being a top 10 guy for you that you love, nor would I mind if you shifted to having him number 1 overall.
Yeah. All right. So with that, we are going to take a break. We're going to be back on the other end, getting our top 20 and top 30 guys in the mix. So stay with us. We'll be right back on the other side. All right, Stephen, let's do a quick run through of who's available in this top 20 range of guys 11 through 20.
Yeah, so it's going to start with Devin Carter just outside the top 10. Tijane Salon after him, Cody Williams, Jared McCain, Jacoby Walter, Isaiah Collier, Tristan Da Silva, Kyle Filipowski, Khalil Ware, Carlton Bub Carrington, and Zach Edey rounds out that grouping there. So Maxwell, with that being said, who do you got as your top?
It's the first guy you mentioned. It's Devin Carter. I adore Devin Carter. He is such a menace on the basketball court. His work ethic and work rate on the floor is off the charts. He is everywhere all the time, despite having a really high offensive workload. Like, I think that is the biggest thing that really pops to me about what we're talking about with Devin Carter. So Devin Carter this season had a 28 usage rate and still posted a 2.8 steal percentage and a 2.8 block percentage. Also, like, those are like the defensive playmaking stats, right? Like, you know, a lot of guys make plays on defense. But what I like about Devin Carter is that he's also a guy who is so physically strong and he's long enough with like that 6'8.5", I believe it was, wingspan, that he's going to be able to guard actual twos. And like if you throw him onto wings, he's not going to get eaten alive. And a guy like Davion Mitchell had some nice flashes in college of guarding wings, but he didn't have the bulk, he didn't have the length that Devin Carter has, and that's going to go a long way for him. But yeah, it's really rare to see a guard with both a steal and block rate over 2.5, and it's exceptionally rare to see it from someone who had a high usage rate. Like most of the guys that we're talking about, like Derek White did in college, or he was close to those numbers. D'Anthony Melton did it, but his usage rate was under 18. Bruce Ryan was close. His usage rate was 21.2. Shake Milton had a usage rate of 25. Like generally when we're talking about guys who produce this exceptionally well, purely from a playmaking standpoint, not even getting to the fact that he's a really effective on-ball defender, we're talking about guys who did it in a low usage role. With Devin Carter was like leading the show on offense. He also rebounded his tail off too, rebounded more like a forward than a guard. Assist rate was pretty good. The passing, I'm like a little iffy on. I think sometimes he gets a little ahead of himself. Sometimes the pass placement can leave something to be desired. It needs some refinement and work, but ultimately he still took good care of the ball. He was an effective scorer. He was a really good finisher, and he got to the rim quite a bit. And this was not like the most ideal spacing team a lot of the time. Like we're dealing with Josh Aduro inside, who's like a really big kind of physical forward. Bryce Hopkins isn't a guy who takes a lot of threes. He took more this year, but wasn't making them. 19%. Ticket Gaines would shoot him, but he wasn't hitting them. This is a team that took threes, but if you look at the percentage, they were 263rd in Division I in 3-point percentage.
Nice.
He tested exceptionally well as an athlete at the combine. Work ethic, reports on him are off the charts, which is we've said before, like that's not everything. But the word going around the pre-draft circuit is that he's just been stellar. Like everyone is saying that he's doing a very, very good job in front of these teams. But most importantly, that the shot is going in. So where some of the skepticism comes in with Carter is he shot just under 38% from three this year on 6.8 attempts per game. If you're listening to that, you're going, wow, that's great. That's a lot of threes, and he's making them at a good clip. Prior to this year, he was a sub 30% three-point shooter. And the volume was never this before. So that gives people some doubts. I personally bought it from jump this year. Like, I know it's a moon ball. I know it looks a little silly. But guys that aren't real shooters don't pull up from the logo like Devin Carter does. Between the difficulty, the variety, I'm buying this jump shot all the way. The talk is that he's really hitting shots in these workouts too. I just see a guy who, from a pure statistical standpoint, does not grade out poorly in any single respect, who is an exceptional athlete, who plays really hard, who has good character reviews. And I think he can play as an off-ball guard in this modern NBA and be a second side closeout attacker the way that a lot of teams are using their guards now. Do I wish that he was more of a table setter? Yeah. Do I wish he had like just that Tyler Kolek passing window feel? Yeah, I do.
Yep.
But I think this is a guy who can really, really succeed in an off-guard role and just bring so much value to the table with all the different ways that he can impact a game that I think he can withstand a little bit of slippage to the shot even. So I love Devin Carter. I'm going to have him quite a bit higher than 11. I might have him like dangerously high just because I really buy him having a pro career.
Yeah.
4? I don't think 4 would be outrageous.
Oh.
I don't think it's outrageous. I think I probably won't end up having him there, but I think that there's a chance that ends up being the value he returns.
Man.
So yeah, I love Devin Carter. What are your thoughts on him?
I also heart Devin Carter, and I think, man, the consensus did us such a favor that he came out to rank 11th on the consensus top 20, because now we can like just wear our I Love Devin Carter t-shirts. Of all the players that we've talked about so far, including those who might go number 1, Devin Carter like beat them all in scoring.
Mm-hmm.
Like almost 20 points per game, almost 9 rebounds per game, 3.5 assists, almost 2 steals, 1 block, 47, 38, and 75 shooting splits. I mean, and I'm throwing myself in there, we talk about Devin Carter as if he is just like kind of bereft of an offensive skill set outside of shooting. But I mean, the guy had a 23.3 assist percentage and a 16.1 turnover percentage, right? It's not great, but that's not nothing either. You know what I mean? Like, I think that he's kind of almost unheralded on the offensive end because we kind of know what he's going to be defensively. I think that he's got more offense to his game. I mean, the dude also had 26 dunks on the season.
Yeah, that's the thing is he gets up. Like I'm gonna credit Sam Vecini on this one, but he made the comment a while ago, like, you know what I like about Devin Carter's combine numbers is that you can see it how he plays on the court. Like there's a lot of guys that are athletic in a vacuum in a way that does not benefit them all on the basketball court. And Devin Carter is not one of those guys.
Yeah, I mean, it shows up in the rebounding, shows up in the at-rim finishing, it shows up in the recovery and ground coverage that he has. I mean, he broke the 3-quarter sprint record at the combine. I mean, this dude is just the Troy Polamalu of basketball players, and I think that he has such a good, well-rounded game that doesn't get enough credit on the offensive end. I mean, 89th percentile, Maxwell, in pick-and-roll ball handlers, 90th percentile on handoffs, 71st in isolation, 73rd in dribble jumpers. So this dude is creating his own offense as well. So 18 and ones, 140 fouls drawn, only 63 committed, drew 60 shooting fouls, 13 double-doubles. Opponents only shot 32.2% on threes against him and only 38.1% on their twos against him, Maxwell. So I just think that we're talking about the next all-defensive NBA guard in Devin Carter. I don't think that that's even being hyperbolic or superlative with him. I think that's kind of who we're looking at, and it almost feels like it's screaming at us. And the fact that we're like, well, he might only be a 36% three-point shooter instead of a 38 in the NBA, and maybe he's not a true point guard and can't orchestrate an offense at a high level. Maybe that's why we should have him like in this 11 range instead of top 4. Maxwell, I'm with you, dude. I think I have him. Crap, I don't have it available to me right now, but like 7th or 8th.
Yeah, he's in my tier 2, which is like much bigger than a tier 2 would be in a normal year.
Yeah,
tier
so
2 is like 4 through 11 this year.
That goes up to 4 to me though, so I don't think that 4 is outrageous. And I think even if we're going to be those people that say, "Oh, I liked him. I was higher on him than consensus because I had him 7th," that might not even be good enough relative to like what this guy puts out at his best effort at the next level, man. So
yeah,
I love that shout.
And real quick, because I think this is like I mentioned, like I don't think it's an unreasonable feel. Like I feel like a lot of these fears with the guys this year are reasonable. Dirty Dancer says the fear is that he's Davion Mitchell and just had a spike in shooting. I think to me what the difference is I think, and I'm trying to pull up Davion's Baylor numbers right now, is that he was a lot more like toes on the line as a shooter. Like he was doing a lot of the same pull-up stuff, but he was closer to the line a lot more often than Carter was, if I recall. And I would say the other thing too
athletic either
is I think there's a real athletic disparity, and I think there is more defensive playmaking that you're getting. Where with Davion, part of the sell was the on-ball defense, which is just like tricky because you can just get screened a lot at the next level. Like it's still a little tougher. So that's what I would say to me is the difference. Is that a potential outcome? Yeah. Like could that be the case? Yeah. He's also a much better rebounder, like 3 times the rebounding rate. So he is going to find other ways to impact the ball that, like, just based on Davion's overall physical dimensions, he wasn't really able to do.
Yeah, I mean, look at what Brandon Pajemski did for the Golden State Warriors as a rookie this year. Similar rebounding rate, right? Like that stuff translates well. The steals and blocks translate well. Like there's just so much that this guy does that looks like it can scale up. But Maxwell, let's move on to my top 20 guy, a player who I know you're like just thrilled to death to talk about. We're going to talk about Cody Williams here on this spot. And now he is getting a lot of buzz within this top 20 range, and I totally get it. I totally understand it, but I think that there's just too much there to kind of just like throw away. We've talked about this ad nauseum. I mean, he's got good positional size. In shoes, he's going to stand close to 6'8". Did he only come in to weigh 178 pounds at the combine? Yes. Did that really impact his game at all at college? I would dare to say no, man. I mean, we're talking about a guy who, let's see here. He got a 2.4 block percentage, 1.3 steal percentage. The rebounding numbers aren't great, and this is where a lot of people will typically beat up Cody Williams. The 3.3 offensive rebound percentage I think is pretty good, but he only had a 9.2 defensive rebound percentage. I will say that there are a lot of other really good rebounders on Colorado as well, so I think that kind of eats into it right? He was in the 84th percentile in transition, 86th percentile on spot ups, 89th on cuts, 49th on handoffs, and operating out of the pick and roll. He had 12 and ones on the season, second on the team in and one percentage, and he missed a lot of game too, right? And came back, played hurt. He drew 39 shooting fouls. He was positives on the fouls drawn to committed ratio, although very minor. And he held opponents too. And this is what kind of gets me on the Cody Williams narrative, is that the weight is holding him back defensively. I don't think that he's a perfect defensive prospect, but these numbers I don't think are too far off from what I saw on the film. He held opponents to 32.2% on threes and 36.2% on twos. And I think where people kind of bring up the weight with Cody Williams reminds me a little bit of what we talked about with Brandon Miller out of Alabama next year. Now, I'm not saying that he's going to be a Brandon Miller, but we talked about certain numbers with Brandon Miller last year. And I'm of the mindset, Maxwell, that strength is going to shore up a lot of Cody Williams' weaknesses. So if we look at the fact that even though he doesn't weigh in to the highest weight that we want to see, it didn't affect his gameplay. He got to the offensive glass at a fair rate. There are a lot of other really strong rebounders on Colorado. I think that we need to contextualize that rebound percentage, right? Where they had KJ, they had Tristan da Silva, who's the big man that they got from TCU that transferred.
Oh, Edey Lampkin, yeah.
Edey Lampkin, right? So there are a lot of hosses on that team that rebound. So I don't know if we can necessarily criticize Cody because he doesn't play like he's afraid of contact. That's the thing that doesn't scare me. So when he does put on this functional weight, I don't know if he's going to put on 30 pounds, but if he puts on like that 15 to 20 and it doesn't affect his game, Maxwell, I think that we're looking at a very talented defender, a very talented rebounder, and a high feel, very savvy, tall positionally, can scale up and down the lineup. Of course, it helps that his brother is really good in the NBA, but I just think that Cody is such a very talented player. He's in my top 10 because I think, Maxwell, that if we take all things into consideration, if everything hits right for all these players, Cody could have like the highest upside out of anybody in this class. And I think that that has gone way too far under the radar and very under discussed for the year.
Man, I'm so confused by Cody Williams.
I know you are.
I'm going to throw this comment from Gregory Castillo on the board here because it's so funny. I need to put Karis LeVert's irrational confidence in Cody. Like,
yes,
that would be the dream. Like, I wish he played like Karis LeVert. Yeah,
shout out to Dirty Dancer. I still have Cody in my top 7. Thank you, Dirty Dancer. I'm right there with you.
I love the idea of Cody Williams because on paper there's lots of, like, he's got that 7'1" wingspan. Like you mentioned the strength concerns, and like I worry about it a little bit more in terms of his defense and how he's going to be able to contain the ball and how he rebounds on defense, because he was like an exceptionally poor defensive rebounder. And I know that he had other rebounders on the court, but to me, there was like a lot of times on the film where I watched him just like kind of stand and watch, where I feel like he could have gone and got them and he didn't. What I do like about him is that he's got a 7'1" wingspan. He was an exceptional rim finisher. And even though the volume on three was super low, we're talking 41 attempts across an entire season, he was really effective on his catch and shoot shots. Just ultimately a really good touch guy. Like any area on the floor that you want to put him in, like the touch looks really good, which is exciting. Yep. It's tough to find guys with that kind of length who like are just competent at all on the ball and can get to the rim on their own. And like, I know that like people have some gripes with his handle because he's not like, sometimes he gets a little high, sometimes he gets a little wide. Like he's not like the biggest like break a guy down off the dribble guy. But I think to me, what the NBA role is going to look like is more him coming off of actions to charge downhill. And I think he can do that. And I think he can see out of those actions and make the right pass on a consistent enough basis that you just hope that eventually he becomes one of those guys. So I do think in some ways he fits the profile of a guy who can succeed taking most of his shots inside the arc. But yeah, conversely, I just also am like, how do you have this level of dimensions just like physically, like with that sort of length and that feel, and then like your block rate is like just okay, your steal rate's really low, like you don't rebound at all. Like I'm just always left wanting more out of him. Like he rebounds like a point guard. And again, like I know he had other guys on the floor, but to me, there was just too many times where I saw him standing and watching. And I just worry, like, are we indexing too much on his brother being his brother? And is he just like Zaire Williams? Like, is he just
I feel
a guy
like
where,
that's
like,
insulting
looks
to
good?
me, Maxwell.
I
Like,
know.
I wish that he didn't have a brother that was so daggum good in the NBA, because I would still feel that, like, and that's the thing, is I feel like we kind of, I'm not saying
He almost
me.
gets punished for it in a way too, where people are like, it's just because he's his brother, which I don't think is fair. Like, and if you look at that initial like run where he was like pre-injury in December, he was in like, are they playing like some garbage teams at that point? Yeah, but like they also played like Colorado State, Florida State, like Milwaukee was a good mid-major team. Like they, through those first 7 games, 14 points, 3.6 rebounds, 2 assists. Like that's a little bit easier to stomach than like the 3 rebounds flat. You know what I mean? Like it just is. And then he had like a really hot scoring stretch when he first came back from that initial injury. And then, he gets injured again. Like, he was just so banged up. But then part of it to me also turns into like, is the fact that he was so banged up a part of the frame issue? And does that inhibit his ability to put on size? And does it affect his just availability in general? Like that's another thing that I kind of worry about with Cody.
And I get the injury stuff, and Maxwell, I don't mean to get so animated because I know it's not
good.
you
You're
to
good.
me, but like I hear this on every, and I'm out there. I'm a sicko too. I'm out there. I listen and I read to everything that's out there, and I hear like this kind of nonchalant, and now like the NBA guys who have only just started watching draft stuff for the past 3 weeks are like, you know, his brother Cody. Like I promise you, like if his last name was Gillespie, I probably would love him more, right? Mm-hmm. But it's not.
If he's Cody Smith,
yes, like he would still be a very talented, good
He'd be
player.
Very intriguing, yes,
yes. Like he's
still a late growth spurt guy who can put the ball on the deck with a 7'1" wingspan. Like, don't grow on trees.
Exactly, and I think that he suffers from visibility too, man. Like he missed so much of the season while other players were getting better. But the thing that we want to hold on to is like, well, he's only getting this high because of he's, Cody, like he's, Jaylon Williams' brother. I think the only reason he's so low is because he played in so few games, and like a normal college season is such a small sample size in of itself. And we walk away with questions: is Reed Sheppard really this good of a shooter, even though he showed it all year long? I think the fact that we haven't seen enough of Cody Williams is like, I don't know. I feel like that's hurting him more than it is like, well, he's only this good because he's Jalen's brother. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, he's such a tricky guy for me. Like he's the guy that I feel like I lose a little bit of sleep over. Like I feel like with a lot of these guys, I have a median outcome pinned down where I'm like, I think this is probably what they are. And with Cody, you could tell me anything and I'd believe it. Like it's just so tricky. And like, Cheeto, shout out to Frito-Lay. If you guys want to sponsor us, hit us up. DMs are open. It seems hard to believe Cody isn't getting rebounds because of his injuries, but like it was like a facial injury in an ankle. You know what I mean? Like it's literally like I would not want to get hit in the face again, and I can't jump. Like those are two things that I feel like, to me, it's all. You can rationalize it any way you want. Like if you want to hate Cody Williams and say like, I think he stinks because of A, B, and C, you can. And if you want to say, I think he's the best player in the draft, like I think it's all reasonable. I put like, I do on my personal board, I do like a ceiling, median, and floor outcome. And I think Cody's got the widest of anybody in that top tier. That's that second highest tier for me. Because I anything is on the table for him.
He just like, I think for even like the biggest skeptic, I don't know how you can watch Cody play and see him just like get to the rim, whether or not he's got the ball in his hand, like at will at his size and the natural feel and touch that he had.
At an elite level. Like,
and be like, nah, I don't know. I don't like, that's the part that has me like so bought in is like just the natural feel, will to get to the rim, age and frame. Like those are just so many big boxes to tick.
Yeah, it's basically like Suhan, Derek Jones, and Zion that finished as well as him.
They're pretty good.
Elite, really high level athletes, and a guy in like Suhan's case who's like kind of getting like spoon fed a lot of stuff at the rim. So, that's hard to quibble with at a certain point. So,
speaking of quibbling, Maxwell, let's transition to my top 30, dude.
Yeah, let's do it.
I've been hearing his name a lot outside of no ceilings in the range that I have had him in for quite some time. And it makes me really happy. Let's talk about California's Jaylon Tyson, who I have in my lottery. I have him. I have him 13th overall, and not a lot of people have him there, man. But he's available in this range. So let's talk about the top 30 dudes real quick. So the players that we could have pulled out of this are Zach Edey, Keyshawn George, Johnny Furphy, Eves Missy, Tyler Kolek, Tyler Smith, Bobby Clintman, Pacome Dadiet, Jaylon Tyson, Deron Holmes, Baylor Shireman, and Kevin McCullough. Those were the names that we had available. And I wanted to talk Jaylon Tyson because Maxwell, why not? He's almost like he's going to be 6'7" in shoes, 218 pounds, turns 22 on December 2nd. So pretty good age, I think, for an upperclassman coming into this year's draft. About 20 points per game, 7 boards, 3.5 assists, 1.2 steals, shooting splits of 47, 36, 80. Maxwell, why I love him so much is because at California this year, he took on the lion's share of the offensive responsibility, and he did a fantastic job. 23.5 assist percentage to only 17.3 turnover percentage. That boiled down to only an assist to turnover ratio of 1.1. But I like the step in player development that he showed to be an on-ball guy, an on-ball creator. Free throw rate of almost 30, 24 dunks on the season, 7.5 threes per 100, which was pretty good for him compared to what else we've seen him do. 76th percentile on dribble jumpers, 83rd as a pick and roll ball handler, 66th in isolations, 51st in spot ups, 50th on cuts. He had 15 and ones, 69 fouls drawn, nice shooting fouls drawn, 117 fouls drawn to 64 committed. All right, so Maxwell, I know that the defense is the big knock on him on his film this year, and I totally understand it. Cal was a train wreck, kind of what we talked about with Dylan Jones on one of our last shows when we were talking about our priority second guys, and we were like, if this dude got in foul trouble, like Weber, I don't know what happened to my camera, but yeah, hopefully we can get that back on real quick.
Yeah, we'll be good.
But I don't know what happened.
Oh yeah, no, you're good. I'll extrapolate on that for a little bit if you want to. Work on that. Yeah, I think with Jaylon, it was like a twofold combination of you can't get in foul trouble, like straight up not allowed to have that happen because your team needs you to do everything on offense. And then I think there was also the secondary issue of like just not a team with a lot of rim protection. I'm going to pull up the numbers for Cal right now, but I bet, they were 300th in the NCAA in blocks per game this season. As a team, they blocked 2.6 shots per game. So this is a situation where like we talk about it a lot sometimes where it's like, man, I wonder if this guy, like if his defensive tape wouldn't be, hated on as much if he had a rim protector behind him. And like Tyson's kind of one of those guys too, where it's like, yes, there are flaws. We're also talking about somebody who had a usage rate of 30.1 and played with no rim protector behind him. So worth considering.
Yeah, and so listen to this. And I feel like the numbers that I'm about to read off match the film, right? And we can't just watch film on a podcast. That's just bad podcasting, right? So at Cal, opponent shot 41.4% on threes, 39.6% on twos. I feel like the threes showed up on film this year, Maxwell. I don't know how you feel about that.
I like the shot. I like the shot last year too. Like this is a guy that like in that more like complementary role, like we were talking about, like because it's key for guys to be able to scale back. And I think if you want to be optimistic about Tyson, one of the biggest things you can point to is his tape last year where it was more of an off-ball role. He shot 40.2% from three last year. Like I thoroughly trust Jaylon Tyson as a guy who can just like make catch and shoot threes.
For sure. But defensively, Maxwell, he allowed 41.4% on threes and 39.6 on twos. I felt like that matches his defensive film this year at Cal. Let's turn the tape back to Tech. His last year at Tech before he transferred over, his opponents only shot 30.6% on threes and 38% on twos. I also felt like that matched the film because to me at Tech, he was an athletic, very good defensive, up and down offensive player, right? This year at Cal, he like really steps in, grows as an on-ball guy, like grows into a very good dribble jumper, like self-created three-point looks, and is making them at a very respectable level, about 36% on some very difficult threes. Maxwell, I feel like where I love him so much is because I'm married to the offensive film from this year and the defensive film the years prior. And I'm just looking at a well-rounded athlete who is going to be about 6'7" on a basketball court, who is a, very good athlete, very strong, and
220,
sees,
yeah, like a guy who's
yes,
not going to be one of those guys that like you put him on an NBA court and it's like, oh, he's just getting like moved around. Like that's not going to happen to him.
I think that he can play so many positions on a floor. I truly think that he could be a 2 through 4 guy, depending on the rotation and roster construction. And that goes a long way, man. So, I mean, if I'm looking at a 3-and-D dude who has some level of creation, self and for others, and rebounds well, too. I mean, you're looking at a guy who had a 5.2 offensive rebound percentage and a 17 defensive rebound percentage, just all over the court, right, on both sides of the floor. I don't know. I understand that there are drawbacks. I also understand that, like, I'm higher on him than most, but I also don't understand why people could have him outside their top 30. Like, that's kind of like the range. Like, that's the world that I'm living in right now. I'm kind of like, why don't you have him in your top 20 even now relative to the rest of this class?
So I think if you're having him outside of the top 30, you're sort of believing that the defensive concerns can't be remedied. And you're thinking that offensively he is wired to like the pretty stuff too much, and that he's going to be a guy who sort of slows down the ball and is more content to take a mid-range shot than get all the way to the rim or 0.5 it or whatever. I feel like I see a lot of I try not to comp guys to like Heat players. So I feel like I see a lot of like Caleb Martin in terms of like how he can operate on the court and like score and make tough shots and still be within the flow of an offense. Defensively, I am like a little bit concerned. I don't like his lateral foot speed, and I don't like how he changes directions in space. Like even last year, like I just wasn't wild about how well he moves and like shifts around the floor defensively. So like that's where I'm a little bit lower on him. Like I have him in the 20s. But I do think depending on the team, maybe he's a guy that goes higher. Like, I think if you're a team that is just sort of looking for this offensive injection off the bench, like, and this is a team that picks later, but a team like the Timberwolves, where they were running into defensive issues and they didn't quite have the offensive firepower to get back over the hump to respond when it became more of a shootout. That's a team where I'm like, ooh, maybe I get the guy who just like is bulky and strong and not a physical mismatch. Maybe we shore some things up. And then offensively, he can give us a little bit of everything. I also think Tyson's like an underrated competitor. Like I felt like he always played really hard. And I know that Cal, just from like an overall roster, like record standpoint, wasn't great. But you look at once Tyson was kind of like back and settled in, they were sort of a much more competitive team, especially down the stretch in SEC play. So I thought that he got better as the year went along. I thought he made his team better. I think you can just get a little bit of everything from him on the court offensively. Nice blend of like modern athleticism and old school funk as far as how he creates for himself and others with real size. Like I think if you're putting him too low, you're like over indexing on the worst aspects of him rather than like looking at the pretty obvious stuff that's there.
And I think that you're ignoring a lot of the tech film from last year. Like that's just truly like people who hated the defensive film at California. Hey, my hands up. I'm right here with you. Right. That's why you got to look at everything, especially with the upperclassmen, and contextualizing the fact that Coach Madsen, if Tyson was out, like there was nowhere for California to run like at all. It was bad, man. So, speaking of nowhere to run, no one can run away from a guy as big as Zach Edey, who is your top 30 guy, Maxwell. How do you feel about him being this low, according to consensus? Because I feel like there are a lot of people that have him significantly higher.
Yeah, I think to me, if you have him this low, you're probably just like being a little bit particular about team fit. And I get it from like a team standpoint too. Like if I'm the Timberwolves, I don't have him particularly high on my board. Or if I'm the 76ers, I don't have him particularly high on my board. If I'm going to be playing him 10 minutes a game or something like that, you know what I mean? Like there are definitely teams where I don't know that he makes a lot of sense. But I think just if you were making a board in a vacuum, you're maybe being a little bit obtuse if you have him this low. I think my hot Zach Edey take that I've had kind of throughout the year is that I think his median outcome is much better than people realize. I just think he is a starting NBA center. 7'10" wingspan, exceptionally dominant as a rebounder, exceptionally dominant as an interior finisher, had an outrageously high usage rate. There's no way to keep him off of the glass. I think that will even be more of the case at the next level when his role is a little bit more simplified, even with some low motor defensive play. And I say that not as a knock on him, but more so acknowledging that even at his size, a 300-pound man was playing 33 minutes a game and having to avoid foul trouble.
299 pounds, Maxwell.
Oh,
he's
my
not
bad,
yet
my
a three.
bad.
Yes, yes.
Give him a sandwich and I'll get over that. He prevented opponents from taking a lot of shots at the rim and held them to a low percentage at the rim, which is great. Still had a solid block rate. I think the idea of him is that, like, if you just reduce the offensive usage a little bit and just refine the defense at that size, I just think he's a starting NBA center. I think you look at guys like Jonas Valanciunas and the success that he had as a player, like that's kind of what I see for Edey as like a median outcome. I think there's a non-zero chance that he just comes into the NBA and is still so physically large and imposing that he gets his way on offense. And even with some of the defensive shortcomings, he is too much to stop. I know the assist rate wasn't like awesome, but I think that he still has a really solid awareness of defensive rotations and how to punish them, which makes me optimistic about him being, if you're going to say, well, he's not going to get posted up as much, I do think that there is a chance that that could be a functional short roll skill for him in time because he has that basic recognition of how defenses operate. He's going to set awesome screens and open guys up. He's going to rebound. He's going to keep guys out of the paint, and that's what you're asking for. Is he going to be a good switch defender? No. Are there going to be lineups that he has a really hard time against? Yes, I understand that. I also just think that his cardio and ability to move at his sheer size is still very, very impressive. And I think that there might even be more to be untapped in there because the work ethic reports on him are so outstanding. I think he is going to maximize every single thing that he has in him athletically. And we just saw him in such a high usage role that, like, guys his size don't typically play. I think people that are like, he's just Boban, I think you're kind of underselling how skilled and how good his cardio is.
Let me stop you there.
Yeah.
The Bobby comp is like so used, and I get it because Bobby is a large human being. Mm-hmm. I think that he's closer to like an Ivica Zubac.
Yeah.
As far as like a comparison goes.
Sure. Yeah. And I think because of the extra length that he has, even if he's 85% of Zubac athletically, that can be fine. I get that different teams are going to have different scheme preferences. I get being concerned as the league goes more 5 out, but I think as the league goes more 5 out, if you're going to have skinnier, more mobile centers, this is still a mismatch weapon that could be valuable. But I think in the immediate short term, he is going to provide value for you right away. And I think you're probably getting too cute with it if you've got him too low.
Yeah, and I mean, look at what we saw in the playoffs this year when you have a team that's specifically built to stop one team, but you're not ready for a counterpunch for the other. I mean, it really benefited the Minnesota Timberwolves that they had a Rudy Gobert and a Karl Anthony Towns and a Naz Reid that they could all throw at the front court for Denver, right? If you can add a Zach Edey, I think you could do a similar thing where depending on what your matchup is, maybe you lean into the Zach Edey minutes. But if you're going up against, say, like an Oklahoma City or a Boston Celtics, maybe you don't lean into that as much, or a Dallas Mavericks, right? 80.9 free throw rate. I thought that was a typo when I looked that up on on Bart Torvik. 6.9 block percentage, nice. 0.5 steal percentage, 18.1 offensive rebound percentage, 25.5 defensive rebound percentage. Was a positive assist to turnover guy. Had 113 dunks on the year, Maxwell. That's insane. 81st percentile on putbacks, 97th percent as the roll man. 39 and ones, 159 shooting fouls, Maxwell. 350 fouls drawn to only 72 committed. That's insane. He held his opponents to 28.7% on threes and 36.4% on twos. That's someone that you could use in a rotation, right? I don't have him like in my top 20. I have him in the upper portion of my 20s though, to the point to where like if he went like 18, 19, 17,
Yeah.
I would totally understand that, right? I just have concerns with like the everything else aspect to his
Sure.
game, but he's good enough at the center stuff to where you really got to consider this guy as a valuable asset.
Can I throw you a hypothetical at someone? I can't talk. Can I throw a hypothetical?
You can throw
at
someone
you?
at me, yes.
Yeah, that was given to me the other day by a friend of the program. I'm not going to name them because I don't know if I have their consent.
I would love this.
What would you think?
Oh boy.
If the Spurs took Zach Edey at 8?
I would hate it because I think it's a reach, and I think that would be a terrible way to utilize assets. And I feel like you could get even more assets. But
yeah,
if you were to tell me that, if you were to tell me that they traded into like 20 and got Zach Edey, I would be running across the screen on draft night.
Yeah,
that would just be so unfair. Like you could run 4 or 5 pick and rolls, you could run old school high lows, you could do so many freakish things with just too many large human beings to be on. They might have to like reinforce the basketball court if with both of these two on the floor. But that would be fun. That would just be like us, if nothing else, like worst case scenario, it would be just fun to see, you know?
Yeah. I thought that was just fascinating. But we'll do a quick break and then we'll kind of go through our second round and other honorable mention guys. So stick with us. We'll be right back. All right. So since we're snake drafting it, we're going to do my guy next. I don't have a ton to say on this player. He's just sort of, I feel like with my guys, like a lot of it's just vibes. It's like, do I like this guy?
Yeah.
I like Keshad Johnson from Arizona. So here's my thing with Keshad. Keshad is a physical force. This is a grown man. And yes, he's older. I get it. But Keshad Johnson is going to come to the NBA just so powerfully built with like a 6 wingspan. And just really great mobility for a guy with that level of like heft and bulk on him. Like I'm pulling up the combine numbers right now. I'm 224, but he's one of those guys who plays like he's like 250. Like he looks like a lot there, both in terms of mobility. I also think like defensively, he plays really, really light on his feet. Like he does a really good job of like mirroring guys, staying in front of them. Like smaller players just have an exceptionally hard time against him. I think the drawbacks with Keshad are that like the defensive rebounding wasn't great. The passing feel isn't awesome, and the 3-point volume was really low, which I get. He was 38.7% from 3, but he only took 5 per 100 possessions. I think in the second round, like I always say, you're always betting on something in the second round. I think with Keshad, what you're betting on is he is physically ready for the NBA. He's going to make plays on the defensive end. Offensively, he grew quite a bit as a passer as the year went along, especially when they rolled him to the basket. His eyes for like, there's the corner, there's my lob. That stuff really came along later in the year. So I think that between that, the fact that he's a good offensive rebounder, there are ways for him to contribute in the games where the jump shot isn't there. I think because he was such a good offensive rebounder, I do think he can be more of a defensive rebounder. I think it's just sort of a mind over matter sort of a thing, but also just like the role. Like Umar Ballo was kind of the defensive cleanup guy. They had other guys that like to get in on the defensive glass. They wanted him out in transition. There were more reasons for him to be like an adequate defensive rebounder that I think can be explained away. And he's a good trajectory guy. He's a guy that wasn't shooting at all a year ago, who wasn't a good passer at all a year ago, who's becoming a more clever passer, basically doubled his output from the 3-point line and started to hit shots. And I think when you slow down the tape, the 3-point shot looks pretty good.
Okay.
I just love Keshad Johnson. If you tell me Keshad Johnson's not really going to stick in the NBA, I understand it. I outlined the reasons why that's a possibility. I also just think basically he is so there. And when guys are that physical with that size and they play that hard and they've got a level of feel to them, they're the guys that I think can tend to get some opportunities. And I think that's what Keshad Johnson is going to be.
I have him mid to late second round range, right? Which I think is fair. Like while we're talking about him within our second round guys, right? Yeah. I want to ask you this, Maxwell, because I've been wondering it since we talked about Devin Carter, and I think that this would be a good place to talk about it now. you referenced that year before wasn't great. Now we're here to where they are showing the capability to shoot.
Mm-hmm.
What helps you to buy into the shooting spike? Because I feel like it depends, like how you feel about a prospect overall will typically weigh into like these types of players who last year wasn't a good shooter and now it is. And then we say, okay, well, the shooting sample before wasn't very good. I'm a little bit skeptical. Or like how you just said for Keshad was last year wasn't a shooter. This year it is. And I think that, he doubled his output and he's a great shooter. Like what makes you so confident in a player? It doesn't even have to be Keshad, but like, yeah.
Yeah, with Keshad specifically, it's the mechanical tweaks that he made. So I did a written feature on Keshad recently. And if you look at how he shoots the ball this year, there's like a little bit of funky stuff to it. Like you can nitpick the mechanics, but if you look at what it looked like last year, it's night and day. Like this year, there's like solid knee bend. The ball goes up the same track every single time. Like last year, and I have a video of it on like my individual like YouTube channel that I used to like put up clips. The ball track is all over the place. Like sometimes the ball is coming up the left side of his body. Sometimes it's coming up the right side of his body. He's shooting it from the side of his face. Like every shot was just so much different that it looked like a guy who, like, if you just like rolled out a basketball to a guy who'd never played, in the last couple of years, and you're like, go get some threes up. Like that's what
Dave and
like.
Buster's jumper. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it just looked like a guy who really wasn't comfortable or being put in a position to take a lot of threes. Where if you watch the shot this year, the repeatability of the mechanics are incredibly consistent. And I think that's what does the trick for me. Like even the ones that went in at San Diego State were so funky that and inconsistent that I never really bought it very much. And it was a big part of the reason like why I was really out on him prior to the year. But yeah, I think he did a lot of work to fix it. And that gives me reason for optimism.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at just the numbers, I mean, 2.7 block percentage, 2 steal percentage, 10.8 assist percentage, 1.2 assist to turnover ratio, not great, not bad. 49 dunks on the year. So I think the frame, obviously in the nose for the rim, the athleticism, they all lend a part in just how active he is at getting to the rim. I mean, 85th percentile as a roll man, 87th in transition. That speaks to the defensive number or rebounding numbers that you were talking about earlier. I just think that this dude is a competitor and a beast and is carved out of marble. So, I mean, at some point, like you have to value those types of things, man. Even if he's not a great shooter, I think that he stands a chance to still be in the league. And there's not a lot of types of players that you can really say that about because the rebounding is there, the defense is there, the athleticism is there. I think that you just kind of hope that he's into that like 34 to 36 3-point percentage range in the pros. And that's where he gets his staying power because he's a beast, man. Like I wouldn't want to take a charge on somebody that's built like Keshad Johnson.
Sure. Let's be your guy. Cause your guy is like similarly, like we've got to check, like we're big physicality guys over here.
Yes.
And I think this is another one of those guys where it's like, yeah, I would very much lose a fight against this player. I would not like my chances at all in a fist fight against your guys. Like, who do you have here?
Yeah, I have a dude that I just recently interviewed, and Isaiah Crawford, and fantastic person just to talk to. I mean, he's so humble, very respectful, like has manners if you care about that type of stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
showed up on time for the call. Like that's
showed up on time, like very respectful, and just like take people behind the curtains. I have been working to get Isaiah on an interview for quite a while. And as you could imagine, he's been very active in the workouts for several NBA teams. And like he was communicate ahead of time if he needed to reschedule. I told, I was very understanding because I've done this before. And he was very insistent, like, dude, I got you. I'm not blowing you off. We're going to get this done. Like he was as committed to showing up to interview with me as he was to showing up to, for a workout with an insert NBA team there, right? So very salt of the earth, dude. And then when you just look at the basketball aspect of him, I mean, he's 6'6", 220 pounds, turns 23 at the beginning of November, averaged 16 points per game, 6 boards, 2.5 assists, 2 steals, almost 2 blocks on shooting splits of 48, 41, and 73. Maxwell, there's not a single thing on the basketball court that I am worried about with Isaiah Crawford. Not a single thing that I think that's going to matter for his position. I'm not saying that I want him out there like running pick and rolls and stuff like that, but I believe in him and his defensive ability. I mean, even just this year, 5.7 block percentage, 3.5 steal percentage, rebounds very well, high free throw rate guy, 5.5 threes per 100. That's not great volume, but if you look historically on every year that he hasn't been injured, he's been a fantastic 3-point shooter. So I think that matters. And I mean, if you look at pick and roll ball handling, 91st percentile, 83rd on putbacks, 74th percentile as a roll man, 68th in transition, 49th in isolation, 48th on spot up, shot 38.1% on his threes out of the spot up, Maxwell. I have him in my first round now, and I have been kind of alluding this for weeks now. I have him 27th, and I'm still not saying that I'm putting a ceiling on him. Because to me, Maxwell, the problems come with the injuries, and I totally get that. He's had multiple ACLs. I totally get that. But in a draft, Maxwell, where and just real quick before I get into this, he's had back-to-back seasons where he's played and started in all games, right? So like to me, that's like a little bit more assurance, because I don't know what else you can ask a guy to do other than what he just did, right? To me, I would bet on a guy who I know has first-round talent and might get injured every once in a while, as opposed to taking a swing on a guy who might be out of the league in one season at the end of the first round and just potentially like just throw that pick in the dumpster, right? I love Isaiah Crawford. Like, I think that this dude has so much on the basketball floor that he is good at. The red flags are what they are. They're not going to go. There's nothing that he can do to make them go away. But the stuff that he can do to help make people feel good about him as a player, he's answered all of those questions, right? Like I'm not ruling out a top 20 grade for him. I'm not saying it's for certain, but I have him in like that 26 to 27 range right now. And I'm really wrestling with like the players that I have ahead of him. Like, how high can he potentially climb?
So the thing with Crawford, like you mentioned, those defensive playmaking stats, like guys that have those numbers don't stink, like generally. Like if you are posting a steal and block rate that high, and I get that it's in Conference USA and whatever, but like the only guy that I'm aware of that like was in that sort of vicinity that like didn't pan out was Chuma Okeke, and like that's also sort of like an injury thing too. Like
and we loved Chuma too when he was playing. I like Chuma. He's fantastic.
Like, so like the indicators are really outstanding. I think if you want to like gripe about it, you're probably just saying, well, it's Conference USA, he's an older player or whatever. I also do think it's like worth mentioning, you mentioned the birthday too, like he gets talked about like he's ancient, and he's like younger than a lot of seniors even as a graduate. So I think because there are so many guys this year where it's like Brandon Carlson, like he just signed up for AARP. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's so many guys this year. It's like
his grandson's playing basketball.
Yeah. Like there's so many of like those kind of guys in this class. No disrespect to Brandon Carlson. Like I've mentioned before, like I like him quite a bit. But Isaiah Crawford is not ancient. And he's an outstanding defender and just has a lot of different ways to impact the game. He's got that excellent frame. Good character reports on him for a very long time. I worry about him a little bit more than I think people that are like super bullish on him are the shot. Because like generally as a role player, like so much of your value is tied to your shooting, and you're generally going to be expected to shoot more threes. He hasn't really showed like a real willingness to do that. And I think I'm a little bit lower on him as a passer than other people. Like I think the highs are really high, and I think he's a guy who is going to be able to like scale down pretty well. But I don't think he's like a super high field passer. Like I think some of his mistakes can be really frustrating. I think he gets a little over ambitious at times. Like that's where I'm a little bit lower with him. That combined with the knees, I've got him like really, really high in my second round is where I've got him. Like I would love him if I had like a way out of the contract just in case things go south when I get him on an 82 game schedule where he's, banging bodies with NBA guys all the time. I don't think anyone that has him in the first is like out to lunch at all. For me, it's just like the medicals and then like, is the shot going to actually stick at the NBA level? I think to your point too, and like we talked about this with Calvin Jones too, like at a certain point, it's like I'd rather have the guy where it's like I'm a little bit concerned about if this scales up, as opposed to like this guy looks pretty incapable. Let's see if that changes. And like Isaiah Crawford is so much more in this game in the mold of like, well, this has worked really well. Let's see if it keeps working really well. Like that just feels so much easier to stomach, and Crawford is one of those guys.
I think to the shooting point, I get that like in a vacuum that the attempt rate per season hasn't been great. That's and I know that you heard me, right? But like that's why I bring up every year that he's like played without an injury, he has been a plus 3-point shooter, like to the tune of like almost 40%, if not being a 40% shooter, right? And I think the touch indicators are there. And to the playmaking point that you bring up, I don't think that he's going to be like a huge like offensive hub in that regard, but his playmaking kind of reminds me of a little bit of like the Vince Williams Jr. at VCU that we saw, where there's a lot of back to the basket and people cutting off of him. But I do think that he has, I would say, like kind of maybe slightly plus feel on the playmaking front. And again, the defense is there. Like this, when I interviewed him, man, he was like, yeah, I watched a lot of Kawhi Leonard. Like, that's fantastic. And like, I always get leery of people who are going to be the next Kawhi Leonard. Like, no one is saying that about Crawford, but the fact that he like watches him and picks up on his film and his game and stuff like that, I think is pretty good, right? Like speaks to the competitive nature at least, right? And there's like an injury tie-in if you want to be really funny between the two of them there. If you want to do that, I wouldn't, but other people might. I just big fan of his game, dude. And I think with the injury too is like if he gets drafted like the end of the first round, you're talking about a guy who's probably going to be like an 8th man on your rotation, right? Yeah. So he's not going to be like shouldering the load on both ends of the ball like he did with Tech. Maybe that kind of like sustains him a little bit longer and makes those like injury concerns kind of null and void because he's not dominating every possession on both sides of the ball. You know what I mean? Like scaling it down a little bit. I don't know. Like I think I could talk myself into without having no idea of how anything about how ACLs work at all.
Yeah.
I think I could talk myself into like lesser usage, like more simplified offensive scheme, 3-and-D as opposed to hub on both ends, right? Maybe that helps out his sustainability at the next level.
I think like Najee Marshall is a guy I've been thinking about a little bit with him too, where it's just like physical guy that makes stuff happen, that like has some passing chops and like is mostly going to be in like a spot up role. Like that's a guy I'm like, I wonder if that's like an avenue for him. And like Najee's going to make some good money this year. Like, yeah, like that's not a bad outcome at all. Let's do our honorable mentions for this. We kind of just went like all over the board. So it's like you can pick anybody. Who was your guy? Because your guy is also kind of one of my guys, but I'm going to let you cook on him. But we both love this guy.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Pacome Dadiet. Anybody that's been listening, even if you had no idea what Draft Sickos was until about 2 weeks ago, you've probably been sick of me talking about him. I wrote about him for NoCeilingsNBA.com. It's 100% free. You should go check it out. I went with Pacome because he was in the same range as Jaylon Tyson, and that's like me picking between my children. Like, who do I love more? And I was just like, I came up with the honorable mention slide because I want to talk about Pacome. And I'll give most of the Pacome conversation to you because I feel like I've like kind of talked it to death a little bit.
Yeah.
I just think that he's super underrated, like tremendously. Whenever ESPN dropped their piece about him after I dropped mine, well, not about him, but about all the international players. And I was listening to the Ringer Draft Show. It's a fantastic show if you haven't checked that out, where KOC has people like Jay Kyle and everybody like that come on the show. I love KOC, but he was like, yeah, I don't know if I trust how they do athletic testing over in Europe because everybody tested poorly. And I was like screaming at KOC over my phone. I was like, except Pacome Dadiet, Pacome Dadiet. Like he tested the best out of the entire group. He's an inch shorter than TJ and Salon. He weighs like the same as TJ and Salon. He's way more polished offensively compared to TJ and Salon. He has some work to do on the defensive side. I mean, I'm not going to gloss over that, but I think
but those are the guys that like you can figure that out.
Yeah, and it's like people give all the like, oh, did you see TJ and Salon did a crazy step back jumper and it went in that one time? So like maybe he's got a jump shot. I think that you could look at defensive film for Pacome and do the same thing and be like, man, he like really leaned into his frame on that and like slid in front of this guy. Maybe there's more defensively to unlock with Dadiet. I think that that's where the runway comes in with him. And I trust him to dribble, I trust him to pass, and I trust him
Yep.
to shoot. And he is a heck of an offensive rebounder to boot, right? So
Mhm.
there's just so much to love about Pacome Dadiet. I would have felt really bad if I didn't at least get to mention him on today's show.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Awesome rebounder, awesome size, awesome activity rate. Really interesting shot maker for a guy his age. Like I mentioned, I have some of the concerns about like just like how one directional he can tend to be as a driver. I think the defense needs polish, but like this is exactly the type of guy that you invest in. Like this is exactly the type of guy who can thrive in a low usage role. And if it pops, it's gonna pop big because they don't grow guys with like size and movement ability on trees. Really,
That would
really
be cool
efficient.
if they did, though.
Yeah, it would be awesome. I would
Kinda
get one of
scary,
those trees
too.
if I was the team. That would be like one of
A
the
people
first things I
tree?
would get. Yeah. But yeah, I like Pacome a lot. I think like the median outcome for him is just much higher than people realize because of like the ability to put the ball in the basket and play with that type of motor at his size. And yeah, I think like the ceiling outcomes are really cool and super valuable in his range. Like that's exactly what you should be shooting for, is like a guy that has an avenue to just be on a basketball court pretty soon and might get really good. Yeah, I really struggle when I see him super low on boards.
Grew up playing a guard, played the 4 for ratio farm, is ideally going to
Mhm.
be a 2 or a 3. I mean, you're talking about positional versatility with this kid too.
Yep. For my guy, I went with Enrique Freeman. I just love Enrique Freeman. He's really cool. Kind of the Keshad Johnson thing here. He's a dog. He's a dog. Like he's one of those guys that just like plays super, super hard. I love the fact that he was the leading rebounder in college basketball at 6'7". Like he just competes so hard, and like
And
even
like
in the combine games, like,
215 pounds.
yeah, and like even in the
Yeah.
combine games, like he's cleaning up on the glass. He's a really good defender. Like he can guard a multitude of positions super well. He's got that 7'2" wingspan, which you love to see, and a late bloomer. He's another guy who turns 23 in July, so not ancient, similar to Crawford. But was like either partial scholarship guy or preferred walk-on initially when he got to Akron. Ends up making like 4 MAC all defensive teams, similar to Keshad Johnson, like a good low volume 3-point shooter who just started taking threes. And as Tyler Metcalf illustrated in his article, like the assist to turnover is bad, and I'm not sure that he can like. My concern with him, I'll just get it out there now,
Sure.
is I don't know how well he shoots, A, and B, like, because he shoots off like the side of his shoulder right now. It's real funky looking. And I don't know that he can like straight line dribble, because so much of what he did in college was like back a guy down type of stuff. That I just don't know like functionally how that works within an NBA offense. But I thought something that Metcalf find out that I really liked is that like the passing highs are pretty high. Like he can make some pretty advanced reads and like really whip the ball to guys at his best. I don't know that it all comes together. Like it's just so like scattershot of a game of like 6'7", awesome rebounder, like really good multi-positional defender, motor that you can't teach, like clearly has a great work ethic to become that good in that short of a time span. And then it's also just like, and like some real passing feel. And then conversely, it's like, well, he's 6'7" and I have no idea if he can shoot or dribble. So I understand the downsides with Enrique Freeman. I also just think like weird guys are such a good margins play, because like it's just not a super replicable skill set. And then if you find a way to make it hit, like you win. And again, it's a case of like, I'd rather take that than like the guy I know is below average at everything and hope that he somehow magically becomes good. So I like Enrique a lot.
Yeah, I know that Kristen Peak, who was recently on the Tyler show, I know that she's really big on him too. And I think that when I look through her board, that he was firmly in the second round, like not like a margins dude either. I think it was like in the high, like late 30s, early 40s, something like that. So there are a lot of people that like him, and count me in too, man. Plus the dude is just like wicked smart. You know what I mean? Like he's just like student body president, like like the type of dude that you want your daughter to bring home. You know what I mean? Like that's got to matter too, right? Dude is super wiry too. Like the frame would otherwise worry me had I not seen him in multiple settings, multiple formats, multiple levels of competition, multiple types of matchups in Portsmouth and then the combine. Just make that not be a concern at all. You know what I mean? Like this dude is just, he's so good at everything. He's a nasty rebounder. He's a nasty defender. And now he's starting to become a polished offensive player to round it all out. I think that's a fantastic shout. He has recently risen up my second round rankings as well. It's just hard to not like a guy like Enrique Freeman. Like dude has like an Amazon Prime or Netflix movie going to be coming out about him. Like if he stays and like wins a championship on a team or something like that, you know what I mean? It's a fantastic story.
For sure. Well, we're going to call it a day. We've gone long on this one, but hey, we got to do it. It's draft time. It's draft Sickos. It's my guys. These are the guys that we're passionate about. We're going to take some time. Steven, if you got anything in the works, I know you've been like doing a million things behind the scenes. So
yeah, I think there's a good bit of the lottery previews that are going to be coming out this week at NoCeilingsNBA.com that I've been a big part in. A couple side projects that I'm going to be a part of. There's some work with Trilly Donovan that some of the guys from No Ceilings are going to take part in. That's coming out soon. So I think that's going to be Wednesday evening. Kind of more to follow. Yep. Follow us on Twitter at NoCeilingsNBA. You'll be able to kind of like follow along with that. But that's pretty freaking cool. And I think next week we may or may not be having like some what's it called? Draft guide. Draft guide might be coming out. Next week as well. So keep an eye out for that. That might break the internet. I can't wait for that. And just real quick, man, like I want to shout out everybody that's been watching us live on YouTube. I mean, when I see these numbers, it's insane. And then when I shout out to everybody listening on the podcast, because we are ranking pretty daggum high.
We're ranking high. We're beating some people that I like a lot. So it's always cool to be like, oh wow, that's awesome that this is resonating with people and that we have people supporting us like this. So thank all of you guys. Without you guys, it wouldn't be possible. And then people wouldn't want to come on our show. People wouldn't want to fire draft. People wouldn't want to do any of this stuff if there weren't people like you that are listening.
Yeah. So please, while you're here listening, no matter where you're at, hit those thumbs ups, hit those notifications, throw a 5-star ranking our way, leave a comment. All those things are fantastic. It's just been awesome, Maxwell, to continue to watch like our viewer and listenership just continue to rise, because that's why we're doing it, man. It's for the sickos out there.
And if you're like just dipping your toe in the pool of this too, like stick around. Like we're going to be here. We're going to do this again next year. Like if you're just getting into the draft, like stay. Like we love to hear. We're going to cover this thing year round. Like, don't go away because the draft is over. Like, we are not going anywhere. So stick around for that. I've got a Jacoby Walter piece coming out tomorrow on NoCeilingsNBA.com. Really interesting to like re-examine this game, because I think there are people that are like way too high and like definitely way too low, given what he's bringing to the table. I'm working on a shooting piece for No Ceilings Plus. If you like the small guard article I wrote earlier this year, this is like a must read. I think it's maybe more interesting and better than that. So definitely go subscribe to No Ceilings Plus and check that out. That I'm hoping to get that done. The research is done. It's just a matter of like formatting and writing it and all that jazz. So
yeah. And Maxwell, real quick, I'm not going to drop the name, and I'm not even going to drop that it's a guarantee.
Yes.
I'll just I'll put it like this. Post finals, I'm in the works of getting someone who covers the NBA like on a national scale and has done it for a long time. And I'm feeling pretty confident that we're going to be able to make this happen. So just everybody just keep an eye out for that, because be a good one. Be a good time.
Oh, and I got another interview dropping tomorrow with KJ Jones, who I mentioned earlier. He was previously one of the guys that came out during the Sickos series that I mentioned that I love. Awesome interview. Love him as a guy. I'm very intrigued in him, and I think he's a guy that people should want to get familiar with. So check out the KJ Jones interview. That'll be out on the podcast feed tomorrow. But I think that does it.
Yes, sir.
So Stephen G. Hoops on Twitter, at Boundboards on Twitter, or X, whatever you prefer to call it. That is where you can find us, and we'll see you all next week.
Much love, y'all.